you could take the challenge of translating the other Armenian verses into English, okay? Send them to me, and let me see if I can re-record those parts and have a new version released later that has all the Armenian verses in the song.
Challenge accepted.
Okay, great.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Language Therapy with Dr. K, a podcast from the USC Dornsife Institute of Armenian Studies. My guest today is Sebu Simonian, Armenian American singer, songwriter, producer, and one half of the well-known top-charting band Capital Cities. You may know him from his global hit Safe and Sound, but what you may not know is how central language has been to his personal and creative journey. We end up discussing what it means to live life between languages, between Armenian and English, between Western Armenian and Eastern Armenian, between diaspora and homeland, between pop stardom and reimagining Komitas. Join us for a fantastic conversation about the power of language to drive creativity, to mine heritage, and to create something new. And if you'd like to see him performing and embodying Komitas, join us on September 12th at the Greek Theater for Echoes of Our Ancestors, while the Institute will also be hosting an academic panel before the show. Sebu Simonian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Shushan.
So this is my traditional first question, and I love it. We'll stick to that. Tell me the story of your life through your languages. Specifically, what languages were you born into? What languages have you picked up along the way, if any? And if I were to walk into your house today, 11 a.m., what would the linguistic dynamics look like?
I am a child of Armenian parents, Western Armenian parents. All of my grandparents and great-grandparents are from Western Armenia, historical Armenia, Eastern Turkey, Ottoman Empire days. The Western Armenian language is my core root language. Then we moved around a little bit before we ended up in the States. We were in Saudi Arabia for a while. I was surrounded by a lot of Arabic in the household and in the communities that we lived in. Also French, because when we lived in Saudi Arabia for a short while, my parents sent me to a French school there. So French was also absorbed. So up until about age 5, 6, I heard Arabic and French, so I was able to kind of speak it. When we moved to the States, I stopped speaking French and Arabic completely, but I do have it in me. I do have the ability to speak without an accent, relatively. And my parents know French as well because they lived and grew up in Lebanon, Beirut, so there's some French and a lot of Arabic in the subconscious.
How old were you when you moved to the U.S.?
6.
Mm-hmm.
And then even before we moved to the States, I was already exposed to English because in the house, my parents would let us watch American cartoons. I was definitely exposed to American pop culture in Saudi Arabia at home on video, Michael Jackson and cartoons and Tom and Jerry. By the time we came to the States, we had a short period in Memphis, Tennessee.
Wow.
Before we finally moved to LA, because my dad's brother had moved to Memphis because he met a nice American white girl from Memphis, Tennessee, while they were both studying abroad in Europe. So that was my dad's brother, and he moved to the States. And so we went there for a little bit, and both my parents were pretty quickly convinced that it would be better to move to LA because we also had family here too, because there was a much stronger Armenian community, and they wanted to be a part of that and make sure I grew up inside of that. So we moved to first Montebello, went to Mesrobian, 2nd and 3rd grade. And then we moved to Glendale, and I went to Chamelyan starting in 4th grade. Too much detail?
These are both private Armenian day schools.
Yes,
For
yes.
those who may not be aware.
Exactly. So there I kept up my Armenian language skills. My mom especially was a teacher. She taught Armenian. The local Armenian families would come to our house, and my mom would teach them Armenian and do like children's classes. That's about it. So a lot of languages. Definitely Armenian, Western Armenian is my strongest, or at least my first language. English is now my strongest language because I grew up here and I went to public schools and studied at Cal State Northridge, studied music, did some kind of classes in writing and English, but mostly it was music focused.
And if we were to walk into your house, what would the language dynamic look like today?
A lot of English. That's the strongest language in the household with the kids. Although all three of my kids, well, the two older boys at least, learned Armenian first, especially the first one. The second one, we might have like slipped a little bit, and I think he learned Armenian and English kind of simultaneously, and now he's not even speaking Armenian at all. It's just English. My first one is a little bit more balanced, but I'm not too upset. I feel like there's still time to make sure he doesn't lose it completely, and he does well in school. He actually reads and writes really well. And my youngest hasn't spoken a word yet. She's about 13 months, 14 months.
It's interesting. That's a very common pattern. Our research shows that the first child always has the strongest command of the heritage language, and then it decreases with birth order, although there are always exceptions. Sometimes third children surpass because of a particular motivation. So the other day when you and I were speaking on the phone to coordinate this conversation, I was sharing with you that when I started Glendale High School, probably the largest public high school in the city of Glendale, which has the largest Armenian population, the lore of Sebu Simonian and Pirates of Penzance was something I encountered immediately as a freshman. I remember my English teacher and my history teacher talking about this Armenian boy on stage. And here I was, a few years out of Armenia, an immigrant kid. I had done some drama in middle school and was very hesitant about doing drama in high school. But when I heard this Sebu Simonian, and apparently there were Armenians in the arts, it was quite inspiring for me. And I've been reflecting since you and I talked what it must have done for my subconscious to know that Armenians on stage in America in a public school is an okay thing. Then I thought, I think that you come from a Western Armenian background, what it must have felt like to go from Syrian-born, Western Armenian-influenced, very traditional diaspora schools where I assume at that point the language of instruction was Western Armenian, to Glendale High School where there was now this burgeoning Hayastansi population. Was that a sort of culture shock? What did it feel like to encounter the Eastern Armenian from Hayastan?
It was pretty easy for me, actually, for a number of reasons. First of all, in fourth grade, I started attending Shamlian Armenian School, and they have Western Armenian and Eastern Armenian language courses. And I was quickly aware and understanding of how these dialects work and what went on historically as well. Like, it was clear to me that Eastern Armenian also branches out into Armenian, Russian Armenian, and Persian Armenian, Iranian Armenian, but it all kind of falls under the Eastern Armenian branch, whereas Western Armenian is a little bit more clearly defined in a way. Of course, you have your Turkish Armenians and Lebanese Armenians and Baghdadi Armenians and Syrian Armenians, but generally speaking, it was a little bit more cohesive. And so I was exposed to especially Barskahai Armenian, because there was a lot of Barskahais there, but there were some Hayastantis as well, even back then. And then transitioning out of Armenian school, the culture shock was way more about non-Armenians as opposed to Armenians. Like, I was glad to see Hayastansi Armenians at Wilson Junior High my first year in the Glendale Unified School District. In fact, the first person I met was a Hayastansi who was a guitar player, and he was like a Nirvana nut, right? And he would like play Nirvana covers with his rock band in junior high. And so, like, for me, the Hayastansis that I started meeting in public school were the coolest people ever, because they were actually into rock music and wanted to start rock bands and stuff. My first year at Glendale High, the next year at 10th grade, I met, my bandmates that I still work with today. And I quickly realized that there were so many different types of Armenians and different cultural tendencies, even within Hayastansis. And I was exposed to a lot of this because of my parents, because they're so culturally involved with Hamaskain. My mom especially is involved with Armenian music. She published CDs, organized concerts, and brought, Armenians from Armenia, musicians, artists, pianists to LA and organized concerts for them. So I was very much in tune with all kinds of Armenians.
That's amazing. I'm thinking of there was and still there is this big tradition of the diaspora mining Armenia for like identity capital, cultural capital, and because in the Soviet period there was such a strong emphasis on the arts and the Armenians excelled, there really was this amazing gold mine. So that's interesting that your association with Hayastansis and the arts. I hadn't thought about that. When I was preparing for this interview, I was thinking about this concept in linguistics we call code switching, and sometimes we call it code mixing, which I think is quite explanatory. It's traversing between languages, between dialects, between cultures, in any sense. In linguistics, it may be within one sentence, right? And we Armenian Americans, we do this all the time. We start a sentence in English, we finish it in Armenian. There's a Russian, French, Arabic, Turkish word. And then the kind of brother concept of that is code mixing, which is actually merging the two together for a product. And besides the lore of Pirates of Penzance and capital cities and all these amazing things you've done, for me, Vuyaman, your collaboration with Sirusho, was the first mass-scale bilingual song. One, my kids were obsessed with it, and now I can't even listen to it because we listened to it on repeat for so long, forcefully at some point because our kids couldn't stop. But two, I teach it in my classes. I teach a course called the Armenian Heritage, History, Arts, and Culture. And I teach it as a demonstration of bilingualism and code mixing and code switching, but also to me, somehow it's like a diaspora and homeland longing for one another. And I actually printed out the lyrics for us. But before we get into that, does this concept of code switching or code mixing resonate with you?
Oh, absolutely. English and Armenian couldn't be so different in terms of semantics, grammar, organization, sentence structure. It's so different. And yet here we are, Armenians, very much assimilating into American and English culture. And I feel like, I want to say, finally doing a good job at it, It's still rough, but it took a while, I think, for Armenians to be able to really juggle the two very, very different languages masterfully. I certainly have not, but I'm attempting this whole translation thing because I'm a huge Komitas fan. And I've been wanting to translate his songs into English and do hybrid versions of his songs. In the process, I've dabbled into doing it outside of the Komitas, ambition. And this Sirusho collaboration came about when she sent me a demo of a song with the idea, and really the idea was just the phrase Vuyaman, Vui Vui Vuyaman. I was like, let's write a song focused around this phrase. And Vuyaman is kind of this like, oh, alas, kind of statement, right? That you can't even really
like
translate.
This emotional exclamation.
Yeah. And I couldn't even translate that. Like, I was like, alas. Well, there isn't this like commonly used term in English.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, we're just going to keep it Vuyaman. We're going to hammer home that phrase. And it's not even an authentically Armenian phrase, by the way. It's kind of regional. Some would say it's Turkish. It's just a Vuivai. Aman is like kind of a regional
Aman, like amen,
exclamation
like indeed.
phrase. It's not like genuinely Armenian necessarily. So I knew like already I was going to possibly cause some controversy there. Some critics, hey, that's not even Armenian, the song.
That's a whole other conversation
right?
We're not going to get into, but yeah.
So then I'm like, okay, this is a perfect opportunity to have fun because she's a great Armenian singer, but she actually can sing really well in English too. Let's exploit this. It was an experiment. It was a challenge. It was an exercise. Can I write lyrics in Armenian that feel natural for me to be able to sing like in a kind of Western English way, but still it sounds authentic? And of course, if I'm gonna write her parts, I went through all this process. She's a Eastern Armenian singer. Is she gonna be able to do my lyrics if I don't adapt and make them sound a little bit? So then even my lyrics and her lyrics became kind of the hybrid of Western and Eastern Armenian, as long as it worked and it sounded melodic. And it worked out, and she was totally on board, and she...
So you wrote the lyrics?
I did. Yeah, and I definitely wanted to tap into the diaspora meets, a native Armenian.
Okay, so I'm not crazy for for that reading.
That story was so prevalent. The first time I truly experienced Armenia was when I participated in Hamaskayan's forum. They call it the forum. It was like 2001 or something. And there were Armenians from all over the world participating, but also hanging out with the locals and making lots of friends. And there was a lot of romantic possibilities. And some of these relationships developed into marriages and families, and people moved to there, or Armenians moved to the States. And so there were so many stories and different ways of doing it, and what's right, what's wrong, and emotions and love. And so it was a cool topic, and she was on board, and she actually was instrumental in putting together the music video.
Which is wonderful.
Which I love.
It's so playful, so beautiful. I think, okay, before we get to the music video, I'm going to really quickly read the lyrics for anyone who may not have paid attention because they were so kind of obsessed with the Vuyaman. But one-way ticket to Yerevan, she picks me up at Zvartnots, what's next? Սիրահարված եմ Vuyaman, դու գալիս ես հեռվից, արդյոք մնաս, ես արագածի տակ մի լճակ, let's escape and hide in Սաղմոսավանք, սիրահարված եմ Vuyaman. Ես կայցելեմ ամեն տարի, ամեն ամառ քեզ համար, are you taking me for granted? No, I'm not, this isn't easy. Please believe me, we're the same, forced to play the game of shame. I can't tame my feelings tonight. I'm feeling alive. I want to hold you in the light of the morning sun. Hold me tight. Obviously a love song, but also for me, on a macro level, it's the diaspora's love for Armenia and the Armenia's longing for the diaspora. And often they can't meet each other at the right place because they come from such different backgrounds. What they share is this mutual longing. For me to have done this bilingually was such a novel and appropriate way of capturing that duality. And I was so appreciative because I had heard like Spanglish. I had heard songs in a mix of French and Spanish, and it all sounded normal and natural. And I was like, how come no one's thought of doing this? Because it's a bold move. It's a bold move, I think, on both ends.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I love how you read it. It was really poetic. I didn't realize.
Actually, I didn't think to talk about the video, but I remember watching the music video and thinking one stereotype I face in a classroom, and keep in mind, for 20 years, I've been working with 18 to 22-year-olds, right? These are the smartest of the smartest, UCLA, USC. Imagine what they've had to go through, the competition to get to these prestigious universities, and then you put them in an Armenian class, and their expectation is serious, of me too, of the instructor. They're waiting for the Armenian teacher with the stick in her hand. Everything is going to be looking back, looking to the past, heavy, right? Like Tsaner, Lurch. And then I play Vuyaman. And the video is fun. There are two young, hip people who are having a really good time. It's very playful. Like, what was the conceptualizing behind the scenes for that?
Credit to Sirusho. She said, we have to do a music video for this. I'm going to hire a camera person and send them to you in LA and follow you all around. I'm going to be shooting in Armenia at the same time. We're going to go to Salmosavank that you mentioned. And by the way, her verse, when I was writing it, I said, how Eastern Armenian can I make this? Like, will I pull it off? And she said, oh, this is actually good, but actually I would say it like this. So she corrected me. She helped me with that. So we have LA footage and Lake Sevan, Salmo Savank footage of her in two completely different worlds. And she said, I'm going to visit LA and we're going to spend a day just doing random stuff, taking some video, and then I'm going to take all the footage and I'm going to have my editor edit it. And I said, okay. I just went along, and it was so well edited and cohesive. It almost looked like I was there, in Armenia too, but I never went there. It was all, our scenes together were all in LA.
But for us, the locals, we knew you were in Santa Monica, which was
and
like,
downtown
that's
LA,
us,
yeah.
that's us, that's our lives, Again, this like bicultural, bilingual reality, to have seen it on screen, because so often we feel unseen.
Yeah.
I think was a really monumental thing.
Yeah, it represented LA for a moment.
Yes.
Thank you. Cool.
And the LA Hayastan bond, which I think increasingly is becoming so important in every sense, economically, socially, culturally. Do you think the song, in all its dynamics, its bilingualism, biculturalism, was received differently in Armenia versus in the diaspora? I don't know if you've had feedback for how it did.
I think it did well broadly in all Armenian communities, including Armenia. For a brief moment, because of that song, I was kind of a celebrity in Armenia. So when I visited, they would invite me onto their TV shows, and I did one of those. And so that song was being played. I think it's still being played on the radio there, as far as I know.
Sure.
But that was it in terms of like big hits in Armenia for me. That was the moment,
What does it feel like for a Western Armenian person living in America to be immersed in Armenia and Eastern Armenian? Like when you did this TV show, you spoke in what language?
I would try to have this very middle of the road mix, hybrid of Western and East. I wanted it to be clear that I was Western Armenian, but I would still kind of conjugate the words and the verbs in their
you
dialect.
Throw in an
I
or
would say
two.
I would never use gor, Ganem gor, gertam gor. I would never do that. Gunumem galisem. Even the enunciation of the consonants, I would do like g instead of k. Abba g. So yeah, I would actually, now that I think about it, really try to speak a little bit more Eastern Armenian, but not like in a mocking way. Just this neutral, balanced way.
This is a dynamic I'm so fascinated by, because some people have a natural proclivity for language and sound and accents. Like my dad can switch with a Barskahai, with a Beiruthai, and so on.
My best friend was Barskahai growing up, and all my friends in Glen High were Hayastansis. So
you've had that exposure, and I'm always fascinated by the kind of boldness of those who try to switch. And those who never do, whether it's out of insecurity or out of principle. And if a couple of decades ago it was Hayastansis adopting a Western Armenian persona because that was the kind of established standard here in LA, now I'm noticing a reverse, because there are so many more Hayastansis here. Armenia itself is such a large part of our consciousness. When I was teaching Eastern Armenian at UCLA, a lot of Western Armenian students would take Eastern Armenian because they wanted to do business in Armenia, or they wanted to, be in politics and so on. So this kind of bidialectal existence is also very fascinating for me. I had Arman Nishanyan here for my previous episode. And I hadn't realized he had such a kind of like Western Armenian grandmother, Barskahai exposure in school, obviously Eastern Armenian. And he mentioned that he kind of has a different personality in the different standards or dialects. Do you feel that? Do you feel that when you dabble with Eastern Armenian? I've had people say, for example, every time I hear Western Armenian, it sounds like philosophy. Every time I hear Eastern Armenian, it sounds like poetry. You know what I mean? People have, those are not linguistically grounded. They're not scientific. Those are just personal associations. Are there particular associations you have with the different standards and dialects, even creatively?
Yeah, I'm definitely aware of it. I see it in other people. I don't think I change personalities when I'm really thinking about communication when I jump back and forth from the different dialects or other languages too. I'm also kind of okay in Spanish because I live in LA and we visit Mexico all the time. I honeymooned in Costa Rica. So Spanish is also one of my favorite languages. And I've even been exposed to Russian. So I'm always thinking about jumping back and forth between languages, especially within the Armenian language. But my goal is for people to be able to communicate more clearly and effectively. So I don't like too much culture infused in language speaking. Like, so I don't like stereotypes. Like if Arman may have mentioned that, like when he's speaking Armenian, Eastern Armenian, like in Armenia, he has a different personality. I think he may have
like a more macho.
Right. And that should be pulled out. Like it should really be very technical. It should be about the semantics so that all sides can communicate better with each other. I think, like, for example, the fact that the letters are pronounced differently in Western Armenian compared to Eastern Armenian is a big issue, especially for Western Armenians, because we have more difficulty doing proper spelling because of the quirkiness of the pronunciation of the letters. You know, we have two k's instead of a k, g, and a k.
So exactly, for those who may not be aware, Armenian has a set of 3 similar sounding letters. So like K sounds, we have g, g, k. In Eastern Armenian, it's 3 letters, 3 sounds. In Western Armenian, it's 3 letters, 2 sounds. So if in Eastern we would say g, g, k, Western would say g, k, k. Right? So, and I've had this in class where it's so funny. You may appreciate the story. The first ever Armenian class I taught was a Glendale Community College class at CV High School. And so the best students, the ones who had Armenian language training, were all from the Armenian private schools, and they were mostly Western Armenian, right? And then there was a couple of Barskais and Hayastansis. So in all the lessons, they were the strongest ones. And then we came to pronunciation. And the Hayastansis made a comment like, today we're the good ones because we can distinguish all these sounds. And I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
But also, going back to your comment about like culture should be removed from it, we should get very technical. I even think about how the two are complementary. So in Western Armenian, we have like gagartam, gagirem. And in Eastern Armenian, we have gartumem, gurumem. So the Western Armenian is like, I do it in general. I read, I write. In Eastern, I'm reading and I'm writing right now. And for me, if we married those two, we'd have the difference that English has. I read and I'm reading. That's why Western adds god to say I'm doing it right now. And in Eastern, we'll say ընդհանրապես կարդում եմ to say I'm not, you know? So I always think,
we need to come together and actually lay out these specific ideas and implement it.
It's really, and sometimes I'm a native Eastern Armenian speaker. I never take on a Western persona because I think we can comfortably understand each other. But sometimes I'll find myself using a Western turn of phrase or a word more commonly used in Western Armenian because it's the particular nuance I want to convey.
And vice versa.
Exactly.
So I would say it's gartumem instead of gagartamgor or gagartam. Right? Especially if there's even just one Eastern Armenian in the room. I would like appease them because it's actually better or more correct.
It conveys what you want to say.
Yeah. And even the pronunciation, like gunumem, galisem, I don't say gertam, gukam as much in an Eastern Armenian circle. So yeah, I do jump back and forth.
And I want to make one additional point on this note is that I view all Armenian as my linguistic heritage. So even though I won't adopt a persona, let's say, because I think we can understand each other comfortably, I never think because I was born into an Eastern Armenian speaking family, Western Armenian is not mine. First of all, my ancestors are Western Armenian. Second of all, like, it's ours for the taking. I want to talk about, and again, I'll start from a personal story. So I knew, of course, and was aware of your success with capital cities. I was listening to you on American radio. But then there was this interesting dynamic where here you were, this very well-known American pop artist, and then I would go to like Armenian events at Glendale High School or Alex Theater, and Sebu would not show up in his capital city's persona. He'd be like this solo, melodic, folky character on stage alone with his piano. And I remember thinking of that kind of dissonance between what I would see on TV and hear on radio and what I would experience in the Armenian cultural scene. And again, and as I was thinking in preparation for this interview, like you made it in the pop scene and you could have stayed there and can still stay there and do still stay there. But it seems like there's this proclivity, this drive to like tap into the Armenian heritage. And again, coming back to kind of code switching, it's an interesting thing. I guess, where do you think that comes from, this desire to turn to the Armenian or mine the Armenian?
Just pure love of the music. I think Armenian music is very beautiful. And as a child, I was exposed to Armenian music because of my parents and school, and I was in choirs and I did piano lessons, and it was just always there. And then in high school, I got exposed to rock music, and I definitely wanted to make English American pop tunes, songs. I loved the idea of songwriting. I studied the greats, the Pink Floyds and the Beatles and the Doors. I covered all of those classic rock bands in high school, so I became very aware of the craftsmanship of songwriting. But then Armenian music was always in the background, and I realized that my favorite Armenian songs were by Komitas and his students like Parcel Ganachyan, and he influenced Aram Khachadurian, and all of these like famous, very classical Armenian works sounded actually quite familiar. They were poppy. They were very melodic. They were, if you arranged them differently and suddenly put a drums, bass, guitar over any one of those melodies, especially by Komitas, but also the others that I mentioned, Manakian, if you look into these, all of these were students of Komitas. And even if you go, older than Komitas, the Sayat Novas, they were so melodic and kind of Western. They were just done in a very classical old Armenian folky style. So I would probably subconsciously incorporate Armenian melodies into my English pop songs. And then I realized I kept wanting to learn those songs and practice those songs. So I did. These Armenian events, they started even before I became more famous with capital cities, because of my mom probably, and I would always just kind of play singer-songwriter at parties. And so my sister was a singer. I would accompany her for these like little parties and stuff like that. And so when I started singing Armenian songs, like Ororim Balas, or I had this one hybrid song called Cilicia is Where I Want to Die. And it's in English, but I had my sister sing the Giligia part in the middle, like kind of this interesting bridge. And I just couldn't say no to these Armenian events. They were fundraisers, they were cool
It's
things.
the diaspora
and I
disease.
participated, and it's great because I connect with the Armenian communities, and I get exposed to fresh Armenian art and culture, which to me is like my secret ingredient in my Western English stuff. It leaks in, it seeps in, the ideas, the melodies, even poetic, lyrical ideas I might translate from an Armenian phrase or something into English. And so that maybe gives my American English songs kind of a twist, subconsciously for the non-Armenian listener.
What a great way of articulating that. I want to say two things. One is my non-Armenian friends and colleagues are always amazed at how well-known Armenians, how accessible they make themselves for community or institutions. They're always blown away. It's funny because I was just in touch with the vice provost of the arts here at USC, and I was trying to get a non-Armenian, really well-known guest. And he said, well, how many other celebrities have you had? And I started listing all the Armenian American celebrities. And he's like, well, how much did you pay them? I was like, 0. He's like, how'd you get them? I was like, I just called. And they're always blown away. And I think there's something so beautiful and graceful about that there's this built-in giving back.
Yeah. And I think the reason for that is because the artists are so appreciative of the Armenian connection. Like, I know that myself and for sure Serge and everybody who's done anything when they were starting out would like be really appreciative of the Armenian community helping them in whatever it is. It could be a connection in an industry that's not even connected to the music industry, let's say. But let's say, I wanted to print some T-shirts. The Armenian T-shirt printing company is going to give me the best discount because they want to support the Armenian artist. So it's that appreciation, I think, that makes me at least very accessible.
And across fields. I mean, I had Shavo Odajian here, and he talked about how their first big concert, they needed to fill the hall, and all their Armenian friends who were not interested in hard rock showed up because it was Armenians.
Exactly.
Or if you talk to Vahe Kuzoyan of Service Titan, they'll say our first clients and our first investors were Armenians. Mm-hmm. Just because they wanted to support. So I think that that cycle is beautiful. I, on my drive here, of course, listened to Safe and Sound, but then just to remind myself, but I was also listening to your latest single, which is a cover of Komitas's Yesad and Kukai. I came down from the mountain, which is another very prominent act of code switching and maybe actually code mixing in this case. So you took this canonical person, composer, ethnographer, ethnomusicologist, took a canonical song and now have done this rendition that is a bilingual rendition. And I guess I'm curious what the inspiration was for. You could have just done a cover in Armenian. Your Armenian is proficient enough and strong enough. You could have just done a full English translation. But you have one verse that's repeated in both languages. Why and how?
It was just a process. There wasn't any intent in the beginning. I'm a huge Komitas fan, and I love so many of his works. All the popular ones that we all know are on their own amazing treasures, very different from one another. Every song has its own thing, style and vibe, and this was one of them. So his song Yesar and Gukai was just one of a number of songs that I was just kind of learning just to really get to know Komitas a little bit better and figure out what he intended with these songs, how he composed the chords and the melodies. And so this was one of maybe 2 or 3 songs that I just started working on simultaneously just to learn and see if I want to record it or whatever. This one kind of took a life of its own because I realized that I could change the chords, but stay true to the melody, and make it work and have the chords sound a little bit even more somber and moody, and it worked. And I said, okay, this is a risk. You don't want to change Komitas too much because it's blasphemy. But then I realized that that's what everybody does. They change Komitas too much. In fact, when you listen to Komitas versions, the arrangement is always changed to be more jazzy, and then the singer is always singing like with so much nuances, like her own or his own vibes and vibratos and stuff like that, or playing them with the melody or whatever. So I decided I'm going to stay as true as possible to the melody, change the chords where it still gives the same emotion, but sounds a little bit more palatable. And then I was like, wait, let me see if I can translate this to English. I experimented, it worked, but I wasn't sure if it was going to be better, to the first-time listener than the Armenian version. So I said, I gotta put both, because if I'm going to be exposing the non-Armenian to this song, they need to hear where it came from in the original melody, at least the melody, even though the chords were a little bit different. And then I bumped into Artyom Manukyan frequently back then when I recorded this, like 3 years ago, actually. I said, you gotta put cello on this, and he did, and it became this crazy soundscape experiment. And I mean, it just all of my songs kind of come this way without any clear plan. It just coalesces and the planets align and sometimes good comes out of it. And actually, this was stuck in my hard drives for a while until I finally released it this year. There were a number of reasons why I was holding off. But now that this Armenian concert came about and the idea to actually sing this song was discussed with Armand Nashanyan, who's directing this Echoes of Our Ancestors, I said, okay, this is perfect timing. We've got to push this song out. And in fact, it just came out with, at the very last minute, some additional orchestral sounds that was added by Antranik Berberian, who's the musical director of this event. And he was adding these orchestral parts just to demo them for me as to what it's going to sound like for the live show. And it sounded so good. I said, we're keeping these little bells and whistles with the orchestra. And it's out now. I'm really proud of it.
It's interesting because when I listened to your version, I went back, I listened to a couple of other versions. And initially when I listened to your bilingual version and then the instrumental orchestral part, it's so overwhelmingly moving. It's gorgeous.
Thank you.
And then when I listened to the original, I was like, oh no, but what about the other stanzas? He left all the other stanzas. And here I am like
so
a
much.
word person, right? I'm so attached to the word. So I've been wanting to ask you, like, do you think there's something lost in just keeping this one stanza because it's so beautiful, the rest, or it doesn't matter because this is your take and the cello and the orchestral, like they provide the emotion for what maybe is lost in
Absolutely.
the verse.
It's very difficult to omit stuff. You have to draw the line somewhere. It was difficult for me to even include the Armenian verse in there. That was a big choice, right? If I did more verses, then it would just lengthen the song too much. I think it's better than nothing. That's how I look at it, because otherwise there'd be nothing there. And the thing is, anything's possible. Nothing, never say never. I could very easily, if you, for example, really want to see this happen, you could take the challenge of translating the other Armenian verses into English, okay? Send them to me, and let me see if I can re-record those parts and have a new version released later that has all the Armenian verses in the song.
Challenge accepted.
Okay, great.
By the way, as I was listening for this conversation, I realized even this one song is a Western Eastern mix. Yes,
Even by
Saren.
him, yeah.
Yes, Saren Kukai, Saren Western, Kukai Western. Ayrվում եմ, վարվում եմ,
Exactly.
Eastern.
That's what's so beautiful about Komitas, because he didn't even know Armenian
As a
as
child,
a child.
yeah.
And when he moved to Echmiadzin when he was 11 or 12, he studied classical Armenian, Western Armenian, Eastern Armenian, biblical Armenian, and he was proficient at all of it. Okay, and so he did that. He infused Western and Eastern Armenian in his poetry, and he was obviously friends with Hovannes Tumanyan, which wrote in Eastern Armenian, but he was very in tune with Western Armenian and like twists and turns and wordplay.
I'm going to ask a potentially touchy, controversial question, but why not? If I speak to my ethnomusicologist friends who are very much about tradition, preservation, maintenance, and appreciation for the original, they have very mixed feelings about Komitas. So Komitas, who is widely known as the father of Armenian music, who is this ethnomusicologist who collected folk songs and then basically westernized them. So to them, yes, he preserved, without him we wouldn't have them, but he didn't preserve them in their kind of original Armenian, Caucasian, Anatolian sense. He gave in, okay? I'm quoting. He gave in to the Western. And interestingly enough, maybe I saw a similar cycle here with diaspora artists who mine the Armenian and then set them to these Western, or however you want them, frames. I'm curious if you think how you view Komitas and how you view his legacy in someone like you. is that a giving in, or is that what all art does? As I was thinking, I was like, isn't all art a mining of what has come before to present a something that has yet to come? I always have this conversation with academics, and I'm kind of like tired of that conversation. I'd love to hear what an artist thinks about this.
I'm just a diehard Komitas fan, honestly. And I think they're probably right, because Komitas loved Western European music, and he traveled to Germany and studied music there, and that's where he learned how to notate in Western notation. But he was also very much in tune with Armenian music and old authentic folk music, and understood the differences between the scales of Armenian music and Western music, and not just how you might have quarter tones in not necessarily Armenian music, but Armenian music and other music from the region compared to the well-tempered clavier of the European scale, which has no quarter tones. He was very aware of that, and he also notated in the Khaz, which he was trying to rediscover. He had all kinds of research. He was doing all kinds of research on the Armenian Khaz notation. He would write in that. Of course, a lot of his research was destroyed in the 1915 genocide, and that devastated him. But that's a whole other topic. I think he was very much in love with the Western scale. And he did, I think, consciously try to discover old Armenian songs and notate them using the Western scale so that it could have mass appeal. And the Western kind of treble clef scale doesn't do much with quarter tones and stuff like that. So I think he stayed true to Armenian music in general, but I think deep down, he was an artist, a songwriter. He was destined to travel Europe and be a rock star, really, I think. And he wanted to write pop songs. So I think that, he used these missions out in the fields of Armenia as an excuse to write songs. So he would hear and get inspired by the locals and their melodies, and it would inspire him to write a song, like the Gakaviks and the Hovarek and the Yes Saren Gukais and the Garun and the Garuna and all of those songs. If you dissect them, they're very unique. It almost doesn't really sound like old ethnic folk songs. So I think he took old ethnic folk songs. This is just my theory, and people are going to kill me for this. And he would adapt them to become the pop songs that he wanted to write as a songwriter. And he very much wrote as many, if not more, non-church songs than church songs, because that's what the church wanted him to do, and he did that. Of course, he wrote all kinds of sharagans, and the ones that we know we're familiar with and that we love and play over and over again are his cute little 3-minute pop songs, which if he wrote today would become massive hits.
It's interesting that you mentioned Hovhannes Tumanyan, because he did almost exactly the same thing that Komitas did, right? Komitas was an ethnographer who went around and collected labor songs, love songs, songs sung in the field, songs sung by women at particular times, and so on. And then, like you said, prepped them for mass appeal. Hovhannes Tumanyan did the same thing with folk tales. Mm-hmm. And he polished them to some degree, but he maintained some of the dialectal things, and the elite literary force criticized him, like, you're not doing anything original, you're just collecting villagers' tales, and yet that's what has become canonical now for us. That is the Armenian canon.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to think what we would have otherwise.
Yeah, and those songs are so different from one another, and most of them are quite dark and moody. You can't imagine a farmer singing these types of songs, especially without any chords behind them. If you pay attention to the chords and the chord sequence of Komitas' arrangements, you can't pick that up on a farm. You're composing very intricate, interesting works. If you pay attention to Anduni, it's such an avant-garde piece with unexpected chords and twists and key changes. He performed that song in Europe, I think in France, Paris, in front of a big audience that included Claude Debussy. And that song in particular, Claude Debussy has written about and said it's a work of genius. He went and congratulated Komitas backstage and like kissed his hand or something like that. So he was, this is 1912, where he was basically signed as a recording artist by a French label and traveled to Paris with Armenian American and another singer. The album that they recorded in 1912 had about 10 or 12 songs. Half of them Komitas sings. So we have Komitas's voice on record. It's about 5 or 6 tracks. The other remaining tracks are sung by Armenian American, who was his singer, and Komitas was the pianist. Armenian had much more of a bigger operatic tone, which is what set the rules in a way of how Komitas songs should be sung, and it's this very operatic style. But actually, if you listen to the Komitas recordings where he's singing, it's not operatic. The vibrato is a little bit more rock and roll, if you will, pop, simple. And I wish that trend stuck, where the subsequent, big recording artists weren't all singing Komitas songs in an operatic style. It's kind of too classical and too boring for the youth.
I want to go back to something you said earlier, because this is a very profound experience I've had about the act of translation. You said, if you kind of, when there's a canonical piece that you're used to and it's in a native language, sometimes when you're forced to translate it, you discover new depth and new nuance that you took for granted. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, in your engagement with Komitas, and in kind of deep diving into translating, if you've discovered new depth that wasn't visible before. Because the hardest thing I've ever done, and I've done a PhD, I've written a dissertation, I've had multiple children. I think the single hardest thing I've ever done is translate poetry from Armenian to English. I had nightmares, Sebu. Nightmares, because of the responsibility and because of the difficulty of capturing and unpacking layer after layer after layer. It seemed like an endless rabbit hole, but it was also the most rewarding. When I was done, I was like, I can do anything. Yes. Bring it on.
Nice.
I'm curious what the act of translation has given you. Not just linguistically, but linguistically too, but also in kind of developing an appreciation for Komitas or any other person for that matter.
Yeah, it's such a challenge to translate Armenian to English. I've been attempting to do that with the Komitas songs, and I'm realizing that there are phrases that just simply cannot be translated. You could try to translate it. It'll be awkward. It'll be too long. And it's great to go through that exercise. Like Komitas might say something like, Sirdis dovnangav. So simple, My heart fell into the ocean. That doesn't sound poetic at all. It doesn't say anything. So you have to figure out how would an American or an English-speaking person say this idea. Sometimes you'd have to completely changed it to something else, it doesn't, you changed the word ocean to, I don't know, a lake or something. But it doesn't work. Something that'll work in that other language. And I realized that Armenian, you say so much with so few words. You can say so much because you don't need to incorporate every pronoun or is or that or preposition phrase and stuff like that. You can remove a lot, like the n and extra little letters within the word are filling those roles. So it's so different. The rhythm is different. The melodies are different. It's a challenge. It's fun. It's definitely
it stretches your mind.
Yeah, and you also worry about criticism. Once it's out, people are like, "That's wrong." It doesn't. I read, I don't know, I just thought of this, Peter Balakan's translation of Siamanto's poems. And I did A and B, and I realized it's in some cases completely different. And I thought, wait, is he making a mistake here? Should I call him out on this? Then the more I read it, the more I realized you have to sometimes stretch it so that you get the same feeling in the new language because it's so different.
Well, I guess when I talk to professional translators, there's always this debate between, do you stay true to the meaning or do you go for effect or feel or poeticism? And it's a very hot debate that
So difficult.
hasn't been solved. And I think the new discourse out there is that a translation is a new original. You just have to accept. I've even had a guest on this podcast, Garen Rarslian, who translates himself. Okay, so he writes in Armenian, and then he translates the work into English, and he calls it a new original because it's never the same work.
I agree with that. I agree
Right,
with
and
that.
I
So,
think-
for example, my translation of Komitas's words, I feel like is my own work. Even though the
interesting.
thoughts and the ideas come from this, it's in English, it's in my language. I had to really manipulate it to sound poetic and melodic. So I take credit for it. And I will mention that, yes, I translated Komitas, but I don't mind owning the copyright
Right.
to that line,
It's so fascinating. Going back to our thread of code switching and code mixing, I've been learning a lot about you in preparation. And I was realizing that there's also an act of code switching in the genres you traverse. So you've collaborated with everyone from Serj Tankian to Sirusho to Jivan Jr. to Misho, who's a rap artist, and you've kind of dabbled in these different genres. Is that a conscious act of stretching your repertoire? How do you think about those acts of code switching, code mixing?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what's happening. It's experimenting with not just a different dialect, mixing two different languages, and mixing styles, musical styles. And I've been blessed to have these really cool artists want to collaborate with me and suggest interesting ideas. Misho, I've collaborated with at least twice. One of his outfits is called Mikani Hogi. And they have a song called SMS, which is like a texting kind of love song. And so all the verses are in kind of dark, twisted gangster Armenian rap. And then here I am singing this like English language chorus in between. And somehow it works. But yeah, I think I just can't really say no to any project, especially from interesting Armenian artists, because I want to see where it goes, where it ends up. And in most cases, it ends up being this very unique, twisted kind of new thing that I'm hopeful the more we do stuff like this, the more it'll be likely that one of them will hit in like an interesting way where it becomes maybe a new trend or a new style. So experimenting is the main thing.
Talking about experimenting, so you already indicated that you'll be taking part in this really huge, unprecedented production called Echoes of Our Ancestors. I hadn't realized, I knew you would be singing Komitas. I hadn't realized you are embodying Komitas. Like you are actually performing as Komitas.
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's an opportunity to kind of give that vibe on stage to make it look like maybe it's Komitas, like, acting as Komitas, playing on the piano. It's going to be a hint. And there's going to be a lot of visual production with this concert in general. And during my performance as well, there's going to be some ballet dancing, some really cool LED visuals. So I'm looking forward to the rehearsals to see what it's actually going to end up looking like. Full orchestra in an orchestra pit.
But is that a heightened sense of responsibility, or is that an act of liberation? Like, not only am I performing Komitas, I get to, for a few minutes, be Komi. How do you feel about that?
I don't want to think about it too much because it is such a big, overwhelming thing, ambitious project. I trust Arman and the crew and the director, the musical director, Antranik Berberian. the orchestra. There's going to be a duet ballet dancing happening. So I'm just kind of like riding this wave. It's the first time I've ever done anything like this. Things could go really well, and I think they will.
I guess as a concluding note, and this is, a theme we've been touching upon, this echoes of our ancestors is trying to do something that I think you are attempting, Komitas was attempting, which is introduce things Armenian to a global audience and package it in a way that's palatable, both by underscoring what's unique, but also presenting it in a way that's accessible. Is that an accurate description? And is that the goal of your artistic acts?
Yeah. Actually, it's not a goal to be accessible. I think naturally my music becomes a little bit more accessible because I'm influenced by my pop career, and I've been in rock bands and kind of Western English language cover bands all my life. So whenever I try to do something Armenian, naturally it's going to be a little bit more, I don't know, Western or, American or English or whatever you want to call it. Non-Armenian, let's say. So I guess in that way, it could be more accessible, the result, but that's not a goal. I just do what I love to hear. I'm first and foremost a fan of myself musically. I love music, but sometimes it's hard to discover really, really good music that moves you the way music moved me in my teenage years. I think I'm just maybe getting a little too old for today's music. So I have to create my own to hear new, good music. It's good to me, and that's what matters. As an artist, you have to, first and foremost, please your own kind of tastes. And if it becomes accessible, it's great.
It's interesting. I'm thinking back to our discussion on Vuyaman. I've noticed that in the diaspora, we're so focused on preservation. We want like the pure Armenian. And when I go to Armenia, I realize all they want is outside stuff because they are by default Armenian. And sometimes that's a diaspora Armenia clash too. Is if you go to an Armenian wedding in the diaspora, it's like all the Armenian traditions, everything. You go to an Armenian wedding in Armenia, it's like a completely non-Armenian event because they don't have to worry about being Armenian. I'm just kind of
It's very true.
Interesting.
But now there's so much crazy dynamics in Armenia over the last 5-6 years. Actually, ever since all the Syrian Armenians came in. So on the streets in downtown Yerevan, I don't even hear Armenian. I hear Western Armenian and non-Armenian, and Russian and Ukrainian and Persian. And,
yes, it's a very, very interesting bag. This comes up in literary circles. I'm curious if it comes up in kind of musical, artistic circles. Is it annoying when people ask you, are you an Armenian musician or are you an American musician? Is that a stupid question, one? I was looking at your Wikipedia, and it said Armenian American. I guess, is that question no longer relevant in a globalized world where communication and transportation is so accessible? We have access to ideas and to cultures that before we didn't have access to. Or is there a part of you that clings to a particular tradition?
Yeah, I think the answer is very personal. And for me, it fluctuates. I think I was always an Armenian American musician, where I'm an American citizen. And Americans culturally don't have a very defined, like a clear definition, because all Americans always kind of say my roots are this or that. And then for a while, I thought about being a little bit more international and less Armenian, which would make me American in a way. But now I'm realizing I don't even want to be American. I think all human beings are human beings and we should be people of the world. So my viewpoint is a little bit more fluctuating and nuanced. I love Armenian culture. That's my roots. And I genuinely love the music and the art. It isn't just biased love of Armenian culture just because I'm Armenian. Like, it's really good stuff. Aram Khachaturian, for example, was very huge as a Soviet composer, but not really known in the Western classical world except for his 2 or 3 hits, you know? Saber Dance pretty much is the only one that most people know. But I think he's one of the best composers of all time. That's how much I love him. And it could be in the genes. I've thought about this. Maybe it is in the genes, and like his particular melodies are somehow spiritually, genetically Armenian, and that's why I'm liking him better than like the other more popular classical composers. But I don't know. We'll never know. But nowadays, I think all people, especially given how messed up the world is right now, and the only real way to solve any of this is to really just let go of any kind of nationalism and borders and hate and racism to just unify. And I know people say, well, that's globalism. You're gonna, lose your culture. You're gonna lose stuff. I say culture is always evolving. There's always gonna be changes in the language, in languages and art and styles. So we should, I think, embrace that a little bit more. And even with some losses you might experience, the gain of peace is so much more worth it, But also, art is always going to be evolving and new art is going to come. So you're going to have to replace some old things and cultural elements. I don't think Armenianness is ever going to disappear. We've made our mark and we're in the history books and we're, in the clouds. We're doing our thing. We're not going to disappear. We're going to be fine. We should evolve. And I'm not just talking about Armenian culture. I'm talking about all cultures. We should blend, get rid of borders. Of course, this is some crazy long-term utopic ideal, but thinking about that has made me a little bit less, I don't want to pigeonhole myself, and people shouldn't pigeonhole themselves either.
Well, we need the artists to be the utopians so that they can provide some hope. I'll end on this note. I was reading something recently about the concept of tradition and how so many of us pigeonhole, to use your word, tradition as something unchanging, but tradition has always been evolving. Mm-hmm. What is tradition for one generation becomes tradition differently for another generation. And I think this worldview of culture and language, which is the world I come from, as something alive and constantly evolving is so important to articulate. Mm-hmm. And thank God for artists who save us from pigeonholing ourselves.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Don't make me have to save you guys. Artists are just mouthpieces, I don't know. I wish artists had a little bit more power.
But maybe artists are mouthpieces who say what the rest of us are too scared to say or too blind to see.
Yeah. Well, artists, including myself, do feel helpless too. But, I'm at a lucky place in my life where I get to still make music and raise a family and be relatively safe.
I saw a meme this morning on one of these Armenian pages I follow on Instagram that says something like the rest of the world and parents' hopes for their children. And then it says Armenians and it says doctor, lawyer, engineer. I mean, it's nothing shocking, nothing new. What would be your kind of words of wisdom or words of encouragement or words of pragmatism for a young diasporan person who maybe is interested in the arts but feels this diasporan immigrant pressure to go about a very standard, safe doctor, lawyer, engineer path? You're quite exceptional in the fact that you make a living from your art. I don't think there are too many out there. And is that a privilege or is that a burden?
I think the art world, industry, music or acting or writing, is very competitive, but can very well be lucrative to anyone if you do good work and you promote it right. You have a good team around you, and you're hardworking and you're prolific. That's another thing. If you want to be an artist, you have to work a lot and you have to create a lot, and it could all be bad. It's okay. Quantity is almost as important. In fact, I would argue more important than quality, because quantity will lead to quality eventually. The more stuff you have out there, if you're a songwriter, write songs. If you're a painter, paint. If you're a writer, novelist, write novels. The more you put out, the more likelihood you'll have in one of them hitting, and not just hitting in terms of like, you do the right marketing or someone in the right place at the right time will discover it, but actually hitting, meaning like you come up with something really good. Mm-hmm. You kind of have to be lucky at coming up with something good, because some of the best ideas are very random and unexpected. It might not even be your own idea. Like you could be hearing a tire screech and it reminds you of a melody and it just comes to you. So like you always have to be in creative mode. And I think that'll lead to good results. I think the entertainment industry is just as lucrative, if not potentially more exciting financially than any of these other careers.
Well, thank you so much for this lovely conversation.
Thank you for having me. This was really, really interesting and insightful for me.